It's the most wonderful time of the year. Unless you're a literature student who's about to go home for the holidays to answer 100 questions about what exactly is it that you study and what exactly are you going to do after graduation? What can you do with that degree anyway? Is literature useful? That is the question that we are going to attempt to answer in this video. But since I made the outstanding financial decision to get not one but 2 literature degrees, I'm first going to tell you about today's sponsor, Pair Eyewear. I am wearing them right now, and yes, they do change color. I've been meaning to replace my old frames for ages, but I couldn't really justify spending money on new ones. And I also never really have time for anything anymore these days, much less going to a physical store to try on different frames. But Pair solved both of those problems for me. Pair has a virtual try-on tool that is super simple and incredibly helpful if you're not sure what you want to get and don't have time to go to a physical store. And once you've made your decision, ordering is super easy. You basically just choose your frame style, your lens prescription, and then choose one or more top frames for more style options. For my base frame, I chose the Ella in tortoise, and then I got 3 top frames in burgundy, yellow, and this army green color. They're super simple to put on. They kind of attach, and I'm obsessed with them. I've been insufferable ever since they arrived. I keep checking myself out in every single reflection. I'm actually really excited to share this sponsorship because I posted a picture of myself wearing the glasses on my Instagram story weeks ago, and immediately somebody DM'd me to ask me where I got them from. Gatekeeping is over. If you also want to switch things up in the frames department, use the link in the description to get 15% off your first pair with code Alina15. After I finished my master's, I thought that I would just get a job and never have to deal with questions about what I was going to do with my degree ever again. And then I started making YouTube videos. Don't get me wrong, my core audience, I feel like, are lovely people first and foremost, but every now and then one of my videos will get picked up by the algorithm and pushed outside of my community to a slightly larger and more diverse crowd. And instead of my drunk uncle on his 3rd hour of telling me to get a real job, I get all these anime PFPs telling me that fiction is a waste of time and I just need to grow up, literally. And if you don't believe me, here's a real interaction from my comment section. Person 1, reading fiction is a waste of time, the majority of the time. Person 2, reading anything is not a waste of time if it evokes emotions within the person reading. Person 1, at person 2, if it fills your head with fantasies that will never come to reality, then yes, it's a waste of time, at least for adults. We don't have the luxury to live in fantasy land. We have to learn about reality to eat. Reading is for education, not fun and games. I guess we're built different. I like reality. You like fantasy. That's fine. Let's agree to disagree and bury it. Over the past couple of years, I've seen people online make a very strong argument that this type of comment stems from the past decade and a half of hustle culture content, which advocates for productivity above all else, and where the majority of books recommended are self-help and pop science books, and the occasional memoir or biography of a successful business person. And I agree with this argument to some extent, but as much as I would like to blame social media for everything that is wrong with the world, people have been saying that fiction is a waste of time for a very long time, especially when it comes to literature as a subject of study, as a degree. I don't know if people from outside the UK will know about this, but there was a time during the pandemic when Rishi Sunak, who was Chancellor at the time, suggested that people in the arts would probably have to retrain if they wanted to still be working during and possibly after the pandemic. There was some back and forth at the time about whether this is actually what he said or not. You can read a transcript of the interview for more context on this fullfact.org page, but the headlines that came out immediately after that interview generated a lot of discourse around people's individual personal responsibility to choose a course of study that will lead to long-term stable employment. Particularly on the more conservative side of the political spectrum, people were basically saying, well, you can't really blame the government for being unemployed if you chose a Mickey Mouse degree. For those who are unfamiliar with the concept of a Mickey Mouse degree, it's a derogatory term to refer to university courses and degrees which are believed to be worthless on the labor market. Some people say the phrase was popularized in the 1990s when the then Labour government in the UK set the target to have 50% of all students in higher education by 2010, which meant that more and more people were being encouraged to not only go to university for the first time, but to even pursue a humanities degree. A lot of the criticism that the initiative received at the time, both from the opposition and from national tabloids, used the term Mickey Mouse degree to demean the choice of studying a so-called soft subject, and presumably to signal that it was childish to believe that you could achieve social mobility by obtaining such a degree. Mickey Mouse degree is a UK-specific term to refer to arts and humanities courses, but the sentiment is international and various countries have their own. In the US, the various media outlets have been referring to courses they deem unserious as underwater basket weaving since the 1950s. The term even has its own Wikipedia page if you want to learn more about it. And in Germany, in the 70s, humorist Loriot created a sketch about vanity university courses in which he refers to a degree in such a course as a Jodeldiplom, which literally means a diploma in yodeling. And as a little fun fact for you, in 2018, the Lucerne University of Applied Sciences and Arts in Switzerland announced yodeling as a course of study, at the end of which students would receive a Bachelor of Arts in Music. So yeah, with enough time and money, you can now literally get a Jodeldiplom. And while there may not be any literal Mickey Mouse degrees yet, there has been a lot of press coverage, derogatory, of a bunch of unconventional courses of study over the years, like the Taylor Swift and David Beckham courses. And I jokingly say derogatory, but the reason why I say that is that the way the tabloid media covers these topics is very focused on the titles of the courses or one aspect of them, and rarely goes into what the contents are. For example, they always put the fact that both the Taylor Swift module and the David Beckham module are actually small aspects of a course that is part of a larger degree. The David Beckham module, for example, was actually a 12-week course in football culture. The course was never meant to focus on Beckham's career or media presence alone. It was actually about the rise of football from its folk origins in the 17th century to the power it's become and the central place it occupies in British culture and indeed the world today. And just more tangentially related, I will never understand why it's such a bad thing for young people to learn transferable skills via topics that they actually care about, especially when it comes to topics that young men are predominantly interested in. It's confusing to see that a lot of the same mainstream media publications that complain about the shrinking number of young men in academia in recent decades are also the first to criticize attempts from academic institutions to get men excited about going to school. Do you want young men to feel welcome in these spaces and to go get an education or not? Anyways, despite all of the comments that accuse me of being a misandrist, I actually have a lot of men in my life that I love, including a 14-year-old brother, so I care about these things. But anyway, why am I talking about this? Well, literature is possibly the OG Mickey Mouse degree. But the interesting thing about it is that unlike newer fields of study like sociology, sports sciences, media studies, historically an English degree has always held a certain level of status, especially if pursued at a prestigious university. There was a time when it was universally acknowledged that to preoccupy oneself with literature was a very noble pursuit. It meant that the person was dedicating their life to understanding the world and human nature, which not only indicated that they were intelligent and erudite, but also gave the individual a certain air of moral superiority compared to people who might have pursued more mundane subjects that led to maybe a career in a trade or some other more commercially viable occupation. And this was all nice and fine when the only people going to university were upper class, so they had other sources of income or were about to go into the family business and they were using university as a time when they could explore other passions. But once the goal becomes getting as many people as possible into higher education, we begin to see the cracks in the perceived prestige of a literature degree. Because while it is a course of study that requires a lot of skill and mental energy, its applications to the real world were not obvious. If you have other options or other sources of income, or you are at least financially stable, then doing a humanities degree is still an admirable pursuit. But if you don't have all of those things, it becomes a little bit foolish out in the real world. Because of this, among other reasons, but this is the main one, there are periodic reports about the decreasing number of people who apply for courses in the arts and humanities, and specifically with regards to English literature. Last year, The New Yorker published an article titled "The End of the English Degree," which cited concerns around salary expectations and employability as the main reason why students choose not to study English literature at undergraduate level anymore. It quoted a market survey at Arizona State University, which found that many students interested in the humanities don't understand what career paths a humanities major could lead to. In addition to that, many of the students that were interviewed for this article said that they don't see it as a necessary thing to have a degree in the arts of humanities in order to have a career in the arts or even to become a writer. Another article, this time for the UK and published in 2021, reported that a third fewer 18-year-olds have applied to study English since 2012. The decline is attributed to the emphasis on STEM subjects, reforms in primary and secondary education that prioritize rote learning over creative learning, and curriculum changes that have reduced the appeal of English as a subject. There are a few other reasons beyond job prospects that people point to when talking about the downfall of the English degree. But the one that stood out to me the most is the so-called politicization of literature. A number of academics, particularly in the US, but some of them in the UK as well, have talked about the way that the introduction of critical theory into academia has affected the humanities and particularly the study of literature. They're basically saying that feminist, Marxist, and race theory-based readings of literary texts have done away with pure literary analysis and replaced them with ideological analysis. This stood out to me in particular because I've done quite a bit of critical theory at university, and also because I know what these people are referring to exactly. I feel like anyone who has done a literature module or a literature degree over the past decade will have crossed paths with somebody in their course who stood up in a seminar and proudly confessed that they refused to read books by any man as some form of rebellion against the patriarchy. And while I have my own frustrations with the literary canon and the way that some classics are revered for no particular reason, I have a whole video about this that you can watch. I also see this type of statement as mostly performative. But I am resistant to the idea that this is university driven because whenever this has happened, and it has happened to me personally 3 times in 4 years of university, that somebody stood up and said, actually, I'm not reading the men on the reading lists because it's against my principles. They were always challenged by the professor. And I feel like most academics would do the same. To return to the New Yorker article mentioned earlier, some scholars observe that in classrooms today, the initial gesture of criticism can seem to carry more prestige than the long pursuit of understanding. One literature professor and critic at Harvard, not old or white or male, noticed that it had become more publicly rewarding for students to critique something as problematic than to grapple with what the problems might be. They seem to have found that merely naming concerns had more value in today's cultural marketplace than curiosity about what underlay them. So I really don't know about these sweeping statements about universities as these places of indoctrination. And I want to make it clear that I think that there are a lot of issues with academia right now, and that universities are not necessarily providing students with the best education that they could, especially considering how much money they charge. And there are also a lot of people online and off who have a very superficial understanding of what feminism, Marxism, race theory actually are, and who are more than happy to be able to use enough academic language to have the last word in a Twitter argument. I think that focusing to such great extent on the wokeness has ruined university argument, which is predominantly a culture war argument, by the way, distracts from the fact that the thing actually ruining universities is, I hate to say it, I feel like in every video I say the same thing, capitalism. Universities have rapidly become businesses that seek to sell students experiences. Jared Henderson, whom I also mentioned in my last video, has 2 very good videos on this topic where he speaks from his experience as a former academic, and I highly recommend that you watch them. I also recommend this video by Cappelle where she talks exactly about this fact that academia is turning into a huge corporation, the purpose of which is no longer to expand upon human knowledge and disseminate it to new generations, but rather it's become about bringing the most possible money into the university. In that video, she also talks a little bit about her personal frustration with realizing that the most financially sound decision as a social sciences major, who, if you watch any of her videos, you will know clearly has a lot of skill and a lot of passion for research, is to start a YouTube channel. And as somebody who's also from a working class background and an immigrant, who was relatively successful in academia for a while, but then realized that if I wanted to make any serious money, I had to do other things. Yeah, it is frustrating, I can confirm. Academia is still extremely elitist to the point where it's not a viable career for people who don't have the resources or the family environment that can allow them to stay in that field. And I'm not even talking about barriers to entry. Obviously, I was already at Oxford. I already got in. The hard part was staying there. But let's return to the topic of literature being political. It is my impression that books have always been political. And I don't mean this in the vague, well, the personal is political type of way. People love to quote George Orwell in saying, no book is genuinely free from political bias. The opinion that art should have nothing to do with politics is itself a political attitude. And I do love that quote and I love that essay. I'm going to link it below. But I think that literature's history with politics goes way back further than Orwell. I feel like nowadays, especially online, people complain about literature being political, but what they actually mean is they don't want literature to be associated with social justice movements. What they mean is they don't want to hear about racism and misogyny anymore. But the thing is, literature was already political when the only people writing were old white guys. It has always gone hand in hand with philosophy and political thought, and a lot of novelists were also philosophers and politicians. Goethe was a politician, Tolstoy inspired the development of Christian anarchist thought, Voltaire was constantly advocating for freedom of speech and the abolition of slavery, and before writing The Social Contract, Rousseau was writing plays and essays about modern music. I always think about Dante when I talk about this. Well, I always think about Dante full stop. And if you follow me for a while, you know how I feel about him. The man was, on the one hand, writing slam poetry with his friends, writing love poetry for his idealized angel woman, and a whole treatise about the resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire. Literature and politics, I don't know, they were never separate to me. And since we're on the topic of politics, really briefly, I want to clarify something that I said in my previous video. There was a point where I criticized the statement, BookTok shouldn't be political, which is something that some of the authors and creators on there were saying after the US elections. And a number of people commented that nobody should be forced to share who they voted for online or in real life. If you didn't watch that video, I was basically describing a situation which is that after the US election, people on BookTok were unfollowing authors and creators who they had proof or suspected had voted for Trump. And the pushback from those people was to say, oh, why is everybody doing this? BookTok is supposed to be this place where we all have fun. Let's not bring politics into it. After saying this, I went straight into expressing my frustration with the statement, BookTok shouldn't be politicized, without expressing exactly what it is that I was complaining about. So it kind of sounds like I'm supporting online cancellation parties. Although I do understand the frustration from the initial creator who said that as a woman of color, she wanted to unfollow the people that she knew actively voted against her. She has a right to do that, and she has a right to say that that is what she's going to do. I'm not sure about this list that was compiled. They compiled a whole list of authors that voted for Trump or were suspected of voting for Trump, and they were disseminating that. Not the thing to do. I don't think that that's how boycotting works. So to everybody who left me a comment saying that voting should always be secret, you are correct, and I agree with you. I'm from Romania. I was born a few years after the end of Ceausescu's totalitarian regime. And I grew up in a world full of adults with PTSD from 42 years to be exact, of living in fear that they might say the wrong thing to the wrong person and get arrested. I understand why it's important to make voting safe for everybody, for sure. I was very frustrated with the people who made this into a generalized, well, BookTok shouldn't be politicized, we're just here to have fun type of thing. I was also super frustrated with the people who were on the list and were making TikToks comparing themselves to being persecuted by the Nazi. I think that is shameful. You are not being persecuted. You lost some followers. There's a huge difference between those two things, and there are living authors today who are being persecuted for their writing. All you have to do is go on the PEN International website and you will see their names and their pictures and their stories. Some of them have been in prison for decades, and I don't think those are the same things. All of this being said, I fully understand that people are exhausted, especially after this particular election campaign. I'm exhausted and I don't even live in the US. I get it that you just want to go onto TikTok and escape into some fantasy book. But I was reading this morning, I'm reading The Hunger Games for the first time ever because of BookTok, by the way. It's a very popular book over there, and it's very much a book about politics. And there's this bit in the book where Katniss talks about how she doesn't know anything about the history of Panem because the capital doesn't want them to learn about it in school. They have a very specific version that they teach people. But she also admits that she doesn't know anything about it because it's simply not a pressing concern. Everybody in District 12 is starving all of the time. So whatever the truth about the rebellion was, is not consequential to her, except for the weekly lecture on the history of Panem. It's mostly a lot of blather about what we owe the capital. I know there must be more than they're telling us, an actual account of what happened during the rebellion, but I don't spend much time thinking about it. Whatever the truth is, I don't see how it will help me get food on the table. This is gonna sound a little bit dramatic from me, but I read that and it made me think about the way that we consume books and movies and stuff right now. And I really think that we should make an effort not to miss the larger stories that we are being told because we're so starved for escape because everything is so grim right now. Anyway, so if literature is not for finding a job, or for talking about politics, what is it for? I'm kidding, of course. Something that I find very funny in all of the think pieces about the value of literature and whether we should keep funding it, whether people should continue to study it or not, they all end with a little paragraph where the writer highlights all of the transferable skills that a literature degree gives people and the various careers that they can go into. The Cambridge University paper, Varsity, for example, tells us that through processing a variety of perspectives, synthesizing and evaluating information, and learning how to articulate ideas and opinions, English literature teaches the fundamentality of communication. Elsewhere online, you'll be told that a literature degree gives you critical thinking skills, you learn how to work independently, you'll be a superstar researcher, great at writing and editing, and so on and so forth. The Guardian article points out that English graduates have historically excelled in fields such as law, politics, and creative industries, but it also moves beyond that. Literacy is not just about sounding out a sentence. It includes emotional literacy, historical literacy, and literacy in the structures of power and rhetoric. Who is telling you this? How? Why? Is it working? What do you think? Language is one of the most powerful tools humans possess. We all need thoughtful training in how to manage it and how to protect ourselves from those who abuse it. Helping children be safe online, for instance, includes teaching them how to read manipulation and intent. And that is great. I 100% agree with all of that. But of course, you don't need a literature degree to get all of those benefits. That being said, I do agree with the author of this article that literature should continue to be taught both in primary and secondary school. And I do understand that there is a direct relationship between how desirable a subject of a degree literature is perceived as and how it gets taught in schools. In order to do one well, you have to have respect for the other. In terms of whether a literature degree is useful or not, though, I would like, as a final thought, to point out that the usefulness of a specific certification or qualification is entirely dependent on the labor market at that specific point in time. And the labor market is constantly changing. This article in The Times points out that the rise of artificial intelligence systems such as ChatGPT threatens not only writers and artists, but also coders. Some believe that some careers that require mathematical skills will be mopped up quite fast by AI, while others believe that employers are increasingly looking for critical and creative thinking. For example, Harry Shum, who is a senior AI researcher at Microsoft, has written that as computers behave more like humans, the social sciences and humanities will become even more important. So who really knows what a useful degree will be in a decade from now? When I started researching for this video, I thought that I would end it with some personal thoughts about the value of literature and what it means to me, but I came across something better, so I will spare you the moment of sincerity. I came across this New York Times article from a whole decade ago in which the writer questions whether we should even be thinking about literature as useful in the first place. To reduce literature to its usefulness is to miss the verbal texture, the excess, the sheer pleasure of word and sound that make it literature in the first place. The idea of literature as equipment for living seems puritanically utilitarian, as if you were to listen to a symphony in order to sharpen your hearing or look at a painting to improve your vision. Yet, there is a persistent impulse in our culture to offer such pragmatic excuses for art, as if only something that helped us gain an advantage in the struggle for life were worthy of respect. It's impossible to imagine human civilization without stories. Indeed, it seems fair to say that it wasn't until Homo sapiens became Homo fabulans, a creature capable of verbally transmitting an account of lived experience to its fellow creatures, that human life as we know it began. Literature may not be in a strict sense useful, may even by its nature mock usefulness as a category, allying itself first with pleasure, idleness, and play, but its necessity seems self-evident from the mere fact of its continued existence, so inextricably bound up with our species' own. Literature is the record we have of the conversation between those of us now alive on Earth and everyone who's come before and will come after. The cumulative repository of humanity's knowledge, wonder, curiosity, passion, rage, grief, and delight. On a personal note, a question that I get a lot is, do I regret my studies? Absolutely not. Would I do it all again? Yes, 100%. Would I recommend it? That depends. University was a lot of work for me, both in terms of English not being my first language and not growing up in an academic family or background, and also because I had to work part-time during term time and full-time during the holidays to pay for things. So yeah, it's expensive and it's a lot of pressure for everybody, and it definitely was for me, but it also shaped me into the person that I am today. I met some of my best friends both at UCL and at Oxford. One of those friends introduced me to my now partner, and it was one of the most creatively fulfilling periods of my life. And I think that if I didn't study what I studied, I wouldn't feel so confident expressing myself on a public platform like YouTube today. Yeah, definitely worth it for me. Anyways, that's all I have to say for today. Thank you again to Pear for sponsoring this video. Remember to use my code Alina15 for 15% off your first pair. And I hope to see you again next time.